My name's Evan Riley. I'm 28. A freelance graphic designer, meaning, according to my family, I'm between jobs. That's their polite way of saying I'm the underachiever. My older brother Mason, 33, is a neurosurgeon. My sister Camille, 31, is a corporate attorney with a resume so impressive it's basically printed on gold leaf. Me, I'm the sibling who gets introduced with a shrug and a vague, he does something artistic. At every family gathering, it's the same script. Dad brags about Mason's latest miracle in the OR. Mom gushes over Camille's historic win against that tech company. Me, I get asked if I'm still doing the little art thing. Like my career is a hobby I refuse to outgrow. But I've learned to smile, nod, and quietly count the hours until I can leave. This time, though, something felt off from the jump. A few weeks back, my mom sent a message to the family group chat. Riley Family Weekend, our first annual family challenge at the lake house. It'll be fun. Silly competitive, but mostly. Fun, the heart emoji was suspicious. Mom only uses emojis when she's trying to manipulate. Mason replied within minutes. Sounds great, we're in. Camille followed, looking forward to it. Maybe this time we'll get Evan to smile. I was already crafting an excuse client deadline last-minute pitch broken leg when Mom texted me separately. It won't be the same without you, Ev. Seriously, come, we have surprises planned. Something for everyone. Something for everyone sent a chill down my spine. My family doesn't do fun. They do structured bonding and growth activities. Saying no would have earned me a guilt trip that required a therapist and a 2-drink minimum, so I caved. The moment I stepped into that lake house, I knew I'd walked into a trap. Mason and Camille were already there, lounging in the living room, like they'd been cast in a Ralph Lauren ad. Dad was beaming. Mom was pouring wine. My entrance was met with that same thin-lipped smile she uses when the dog throws up on the carpet. Oh, Evan. You made it, she chirped, then paused half a beat too long. How's work? That? Before work cut deeper than it should have. I forced a smile. Busy. Camille didn't even look up from her phone. You still doing those little Instagram designs? I opened my mouth, but Mason beat me to it. Hey, at least he's his own boss, right? Translation. At least no one has to fire him when he fails. I dropped my bag in the smallest guest room, the one with a twin bed and a view of the trash bins, and reminded myself it was only a weekend. I could endure anything for 48 hours. That delusion shattered after dinner. Mom clapped her hands like a cruise ship director. Everyone to the great room, time for the big surprise. Dad rolled out a whiteboard with Riley Family Challenge scrawled across it in thick marker. Beneath it, a list of events. Medical trivia, debate, showdown, mock trial, obstacle course, public speaking, financial planning simulation, and the kicker, wild card logic puzzles. I blinked. Medical trivia debate. Seriously, Mason and Camille exchanged smirks. Mason leaned in. You know, just some healthy competition. I could practically hear the air quotes. The scoring system was elaborate. Mom explained it like she'd studied game theory. There'd be individual rounds, team rounds, a cumulative scoreboard, and a surprise final twist. I looked at my cousin Jordan, 29 software tester tattoos, and equally unwanted by the rest of the family. He leaned toward me and whispered, they designed a whole Olympics just to watch us lose. I raised an eyebrow. Apparently. Jordan grinned. Want to burn the whole thing down? Did I want to know? I needed to. The games began with, you guessed it, medical trivia. It was the Mason show. He buzzed in before Mom even finished reading the questions. Camille rode his coattails and still managed to flex by explaining HIPAA like she'd invented it. I answered one question completely by accident, and the room reacted like a cat had solved a Rubik's Cube. Wow, Camille gasped, mock impressed. Maybe you missed your calling. Mason shook his head. Nah, medicine's not for everyone. The next event was public speaking. Camille stood like she was accepting an award at a legal gala. Flawless delivery. Perfect pacing. Jordan and I exchanged a glance. We were toast, so I changed the rules. I walked up, opened my laptop, and launched into a passionate TED Talk titled The Evolution of Memes and Their Societal Impact. With visuals, I had slides from Reddit, Vine, TikTok, even obscure Tumblr references. Half the room was crying with laughter. The other half, my parents, looked like they were debating disowning me on the spot. Camille still won, of course, judged on clarity and persuasion. Mom said, not looking at me. That night, I found my moment in the most unexpected place: logic puzzles. Turns out solving design problems under pressure every day prepares you well for weird spatial reasoning challenges. I finished the final puzzle before anyone else had even flipped over their instruction cards. Mom laughed nervously. Wow, lucky break. Dad muttered, let's not get too excited. It's just one event. Jordan, bless him, stood up and slow clapped. And here we thought Evan only solved aesthetic problems. That was when it hit me. They hadn't expected me to win anything. Not one thing. This whole challenge had been rigged for Mason and Camille to shine. I was supposed to lose laugh along and thank them for letting me participate. But now, I wanted more. The next morning I woke up with a new objective: make them regret underestimating me. Not just Mom and Dad, but Mason, Camille, the whole Riley dynasty. They wanted a sideshow, a court jester fumbling through their perfectly curated competition. But now I was going to give them a show they'd never forget, and not the kind they could laugh off at brunch. I walked into the kitchen just as Mason was detailing some rare neurosurgical procedure to our aunt, like he was auditioning for a medical drama. Camille was sipping coffee, probably imported, and scalding, tapping away on her tablet, like she was already back in court. Nobody noticed me until I reached for the last croissant. Oh, Mom said, eyebrows lifting. You're up, we thought you'd sleep in. Had an early brainstorm, I replied, tearing the pastry in half. About strategy. Camille laughed, but it was the kind that didn't reach her eyes. Strategy. For what your meme slides, Mason added. You know, if you'd focused this much in school, maybe you'd have a real career by now. I smiled. Yeah, maybe. Dad cleared his throat, standing beside the whiteboard where the rankings had been updated. As expected, Mason and Camille were tied for first. Jordan and I were listed under other, as if they didn't even want to waste ink printing our names. All right, Mom said, clapping her hands with faux cheer today. We're doing 2 events before lunch, the obstacle course and then the baking challenge. Obstacle course, Mason repeated, flexing slightly. Let's go. We all headed out back where the course had been set up by a local fitness instructor Mom hired off Craigslist. He had too much enthusiasm for a man paid in fruit baskets. The setup included balance beams, rope nets, wall climbs, and a final sprint. Camille stretched like she was preparing for the Olympics. Mason cracked his knuckles and jogged in place. Meanwhile, I quietly removed my hoodie and rolled my shoulders. Jordan elbowed me. You ready to be publicly humiliated again? Not today. I said, eyes locked on the first obstacle. The whistle blew. Camille took off first, but immediately hesitated at the rope net. Her nails, gel manicured and perfect, were not designed for this. Mason passed her easily, barreling through the course like he was chasing a surgery room emergency. I paced myself. Steady. Quiet. Let them tire out. By the second lap, Mason was slowing. He hit the tire jump and clipped his ankle. Camille was stuck at the monkey bars, muttering something about liability. I jogged past them, kept my breathing even, and flew through the last sprint. Somehow, against all odds, I placed second, behind a teenage cousin with a track scholarship, but ahead of Mason and Camille. When they announced the results, Mom blinked. Dad did a quick double take. Camille tried to laugh it off. That's cute. Good cardio, Evan. No participation medal, I asked sweetly. Feels like a missed branding opportunity. Before anyone could fire back, Mom announced the next challenge, baking. A fun one, she said. Everyone will be paired off. Random draw. I watched her write the names. Camille with a cousin who went to pastry school. Mason with Aunt Meredith, who once competed in a regional bake-off. Me paired with Jordan. Okay, that's clearly rigged, Jordan muttered. I burned toast. Good, I whispered. Let them think we're harmless. We were given ingredients' basic tools and exactly 1 hour to bake cookies from scratch. Camille immediately began measuring with precision, muttering about ratios and flour protein content. Mason was trying to impress with some triple-layer cookie monstrosity that looked like it required engineering permits. Jordan looked at our station. So, what now? Follow my lead. I'd spent years learning how to blend form and function. I knew how to balance elements. Design wasn't just about visuals, it was structure-flow logic. Baking really wasn't that different. I kept it simple. Dark chocolate sea salt cookies perfectly portioned. Crisp on the edge, gooey in the center. No fancy tricks, just consistent execution. Jordan mostly stirred and taste tested. When the timer buzzed, our tray was the only one that didn't look like a Pinterest fail. The judging was blind, but you could hear the reactions. Aunts murmured. Uncles nodded. One cousin whispered, "Okay, these slap." When the winner was announced, Mom actually dropped her pen. Wait, what Camille's partner looked betrayed. You beat us. They were just cookies, Camille muttered. Yeah, I replied, but they were actually edible. Mason looked like he was chewing drywall. It's a baking contest. It doesn't matter. Dad said nothing. The next event was supposed to be the business simulation. Camille looked smug. Mason looked recharged. It was clearly their turf again. But I had a plan. Each team had to pitch a startup idea in front of a panel of family judges. Camille went full TED Talk slides. Buzzwords, polished delivery. Mason's pitch was so technical it might as well have been in Latin. I walked up with nothing but a marker and a whiteboard. My idea, I said confidently, is rent a goose. Snickers rippled through the room. I held up a drawing of a goose wearing sunglasses. Imagine this emotional support geese. Fierce, loyal, loud. They make you feel safe, and no one wants to break into a house with a 6-foot honking death machine waiting on the porch. Companion animal and alarm system in one. Mason choked on his water. Camille covered her mouth. The room erupted. I kept going. I talked about marketing strategies, custom goose sweaters, loyalty rewards for well-behaved birds. We call it Goose Guard. Our slogan, honk if you're safe. By the time I finished, even Dad cracked a reluctant smile. They voted. And somehow, miraculously, I won. Camille was livid. That wasn't a real pitch. Neither was your startup that required $20 million in seed capital and a 7-year break-even curve, I replied. But sure, now things were getting weird. Mom announced that from here on out, points would be weighted differently. Nobody said why. Camille's face relaxed. Mason nodded like it was a return to order. Jordan leaned in. Did they just change the rules because you're winning? Of course they did, I said. That's what people do when the loser stops losing. By the time we reached the debate round that afternoon, the shift was obvious. Camille was glaring. Mason wasn't even pretending to be gracious. Dad updated the scoreboard manually after every round, and somehow I kept slipping in ranking even when I clearly won. They were gaslighting me with math. I should have been mad. But honestly, it just made me more determined. When I faced off against Mason in a debate about technology and business, I let him go first. He threw out statistics charts, words like neural impact modeling. Impressive. But nobody in the room understood it. Then I stepped up and told a story. How the iPhone changed how we date. How TikTok shaped activism. How businesses collapsed because they couldn't meme. People laughed. They leaned in. I didn't just make a point, I made them care. The vote wasn't even close. I beat Mason in his own field. He didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. But Camille did. She pulled me aside after dinner, arms crossed. You think you're clever? No, I said. I think I'm done playing along. She scoffed. You're making a mockery of this whole thing. I shrugged. Maybe the problem isn't the game. Maybe it's that someone else is finally winning. That night, in the quiet guest room where they thought they'd buried me, I sat staring at the ceiling, fully awake, adrenaline humming through my veins. Tomorrow was the final event, the one Mom and Dad were counting on Camille to dominate the ultimate debate. Let them. I wasn't just going to compete anymore. I was going to torch the whole stage. By Sunday morning, the fake smiles were cracking. You could feel it in the silence over breakfast. Usually, Camille was chirping about her latest court win, and Mason was dissecting some complex surgery like it was gossip. But now, quiet forks, tight jaws, and Mom aggressively stirring her tea like it had personally offended her. The scoreboard stood awkwardly in the corner, barely updated. It still showed Camille ahead by a suspicious sliver, Mason just behind her, and me no longer invisible. Just inconvenient. I think that was worse, honestly. Before I was harmless. Now I was a threat. I glanced across the table at Jordan, who winked like we were both about to rob a bank. Final events today, he whispered. Big finish, ready to crash the system. I smiled, but said nothing. Truth was, I wasn't interested in winning anymore. Not really. What I wanted was for everyone in that house to see how ridiculous this whole charade had become. The manipulation, the favoritism. The way they'd built this fake little arena with predetermined victors, assuming no one would ever challenge the script. The final event was a debate showdown. Camille's domain, her arena. Mom and Dad looked relieved, like they'd finally reached the point where balance would be restored. They introduced it like it was a grand finale on a reality show. Brackets, topics, audience voting. Judges were the family members who hadn't picked sides yet, which was basically a room full of people trying not to make eye contact with me. The topics were hand-picked: corporate ethics, legal loopholes, finance reform. Camille might as well have written the prompts herself. Mason looked relaxed again. Camille was practically glowing. She leaned in before it started and said under her breath, "This is where the grown-ups take back control." I stared at her. Sure, let's see what that looks like. First debate, me versus Mason. The topic: the impact of technological disruption on modern business models. Camille's smugness was leaking into the air around her. Mason started strong. Dry facts, references to medical software, advances, buzzwords stacked so tightly they stopped meaning anything. A few uncles nodded, pretending to follow. Camille looked proud. When it was my turn, I didn't go technical. I went real. I told them how one meme destroyed a billion-dollar company's brand in under 12 hours, how freelancers like me use social trends to create viral campaigns for a tenth of what corporate agencies charge. I didn't just explain disruption. I was the disruption. People laughed, nodded. Even Mason blinked. When the vote came in, I'd won. Clearly. First time all weekend, Mason lost at something that wasn't medical trivia. He didn't argue, just stood there, tight-lipped, and sat down without a word. Camille barely looked at him. She was too busy preparing for the final round, her versus me. Her crown, her court. Dad introduced the last topic like it was divine decree, the role of regulation in preserving market integrity. Camille smiled like a shark. This was textbook for her. She walked to the front posture, perfect voice, sharp as glass. She quoted legal precedents, SEC guidelines, even threw in a joke about antitrust laws. It was polished, precise, soulless. Everyone nodded. Some clapped. It was fine. Then it was my turn. I didn't walk to the podium. I walked straight into the center of the room, looked each person in the eye, and said, "Let me tell you a story. I talked about a startup that failed because its founders were too arrogant to listen to their customers. I talked about a brand that tanked after a tone-deaf ad campaign. I talked about what happens when rules are bent to serve the powerful, while the rest of us are told to be grateful for scraps. We don't need more regulation. I said, we need accountability. And that doesn't start in a boardroom. It starts around kitchen tables, like this one, with people who finally stop pretending the game is fair. There was a beat of silence after I finished. Then Jordan stood up and clapped. A cousin joined. Another. Then an uncle. The vote came in. I won. Again. Camille didn't move. She stood frozen, like someone had pulled the batteries out. Mom rushed in, voice too bright. Well, debates are subjective. Of course, Jordan interrupted. Would you be saying that if she had won? Dead silence. Camille sat down stiff. Dad glanced at the scoreboard, then didn't update it. Just stood there, motionless, like maybe the system he built had turned on him. Finally, Aunt Caroline, who hadn't spoken much all weekend, stood up and said, "Maybe the problem isn't who won. Maybe it's how clearly we see now who was always allowed to." It cracked something. Camille turned to Mom. "Is this what you wanted? To humiliate me?" Her voice broke just enough to sound human. Mom was already in damage control mode, brushing her hand through the air like waving away smoke. "Of course not, sweetie. It was just for fun." I laughed. "That's the thing. It wasn't. Not to you, not to Dad. You didn't invite us here to bond. You invited us here to remind us where we stand." Dad stepped in. Finally, voice low. "You've made your point." "No," I said, "I haven't. Not yet." I walked over to the sideboard and pulled out something I'd spotted the night before, hidden behind a vase. The trophy. Custom made. Engraved in advance. Riley Family Champion. Beneath it, Camille's name. Underneath that, Mason's. No room for mine. No line to fill in. It was sealed. Final. Predetermined. I held it up. "So, you made this before the first event." Mom's eyes widened. Dad looked at the floor. Camille stared like it had just occurred to her how deep this really went. Jordan whistled. "Well, that's awkward." I placed the trophy on the table slowly. "Maybe next year just hand it to her at the door and save us all the trouble." The aunts and uncles shifted. No one defended my parents. No one denied the obvious. Camille stood, walked toward the hallway, and paused just long enough to say, "This family is broken." Then she left. No dramatic exit, no fight, just a quiet retreat. And honestly, that stung more than a tantrum. Dad didn't follow. Mom didn't speak. Mason, finally breaking his statue routine, let out a quiet breath. "She's not wrong," he said. Later that night, while people packed and conversations shifted back to weather and traffic, David found me on the porch. "Look," he said, hands in his pockets. "I know what this weekend was supposed to be. I didn't like it either." "Then why'd you play along?" I asked. He shrugged. "Habit, I guess. I've been playing their game so long I forgot I didn't have to. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing I'd ever gotten. And it was enough." Jordan came outside a few minutes later and handed me a beer. "Well, champ," he said with a grin, "you burned it all down." "Now what?" I looked out at the lake. Calm. Still, and for the first time in years, I felt the same. "Now," I said, "we rebuild." Camille left that night without another word. No goodbye, no grand finale, just the sound of her heels clicking down the hallway and the front door closing a little too hard. If the silence after her exit was thick before it turned concrete once she was gone. Mom stayed seated at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't sipped from in over an hour. Dad pretended to scroll on his phone, even though the screen was off. Mason stood by the sink, arms crossed like he was guarding something invisible. Nobody looked at me. Nobody had to. They were all thinking the same thing. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. The plan had been clear. Invite Evan to remind him where he belonged. Let Camille shine. Let Mason deliver his usual excellence. Reinforce the unspoken hierarchy. But then I didn't play the role. I showed up, played fair, and still won. The next morning, I left before sunrise. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. My part in the script was over, and for the first time in my life, I had rewritten the ending. I tossed my bag in the trunk, took one last look at the house that had always felt like a proving ground more than a home, and drove away. By the time I got back to my apartment, the family group chat was already exploding. Cousins were dropping memes edits, reaction gifs. One had photoshopped my face onto an Olympic gold medalist, standing on a podium with Mason and Camille, in second and third, their faces blurred like sore losers. Another had clipped a screenshot of the trophy with Camille's name engraved, and captioned it, "Manifestation gone wrong." Mom, of course, tried to steer the narrative. She sent one of her classic long-winded messages. "We appreciate everyone's participation this weekend. Let's remember the goal was to connect as a family and have fun." Some people may have taken it too seriously, but we hope everyone can move forward with love and understanding. Translation: we lost control, and now I'm pretending it was a casual backyard BBQ, Jordan replied with a single emoji. The chat erupted. Camille didn't say a word. Not in the chat. Not on any platform. But about an hour later, her LinkedIn updated with a post that was basically a cry for validation wrapped in passive-aggressive wisdom. Something about real success being measured in quiet dignity and personal impact, not cheap applause or shallow games. It didn't mention me, but let's not pretend it wasn't about me. I commented 100% agree. Still, some games turn out more honest than expected. She blocked me within the hour. That's when the messages started arriving privately. One cousin messaged, "Honestly, I've always felt the same way you did. That whole event was rigged. I just didn't have the guts to say anything." Another admitted Camille and Mason weren't just favored, they were protected. It's been obvious for years. The cracks were spreading. Aunt Laura called me later that evening. She never calls. Her voice was low and serious, the way people speak before giving bad news. But instead of scolding me like I expected, she said, "I'm proud of you. You exposed a truth we all knew but didn't want to face. That took guts." I didn't say much back. I was still processing the fact that for the first time someone in that family saw me without the patronizing smile or the backhanded compliment. Meanwhile, Mom tried again, this time via email. A polished wall of text about maturity, humility, and how true strength is found in forgiveness and discretion. Basically, she wanted me to stop celebrating, to be quiet, to fade back into the version of me they could comfortably ignore. I replied, "I just played the game. You made the rules." No response. The cousins, on the other hand, weren't letting go. Jordan led the charge, dubbing me the family champion. In every conversation, he changed my contact name to gold medalist in the cousins group chat. Every time I posted anything, even a meme, someone would reply with an inspiration to all underachievers. It was petty, ridiculous, and deeply satisfying. Mason stayed mostly quiet, but one night out of nowhere, I got a message from him. Just one sentence. "You were better than I expected." I stared at it for a minute, unsure if it was a compliment, a truce, or a begrudging admission. Either way, I responded with a simple, "Appreciate that." For the first time, he didn't try to outshine or correct me. Then came the ultimate twist. Dad called, which was already weird. He never called unless something broke or someone died. His tone was clipped professional, like he was talking to a colleague he didn't particularly like. "Jessica thinks you owe her an apology." I blinked. "For what, winning?" "She felt humiliated," he said, as if that were a reason I should feel bad. So did I. For most of my life, silence. He changed the subject. Then Mom tried again, her voice syrupy sweet over the phone. "If you care about this family, Evan, you'll let it go. Say sorry so we can all move forward." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lose my temper. I just asked, "Did Camille ever apologize for the way she treated me all these years?" More silence. They couldn't answer, because deep down, they knew the truth. Camille had always been allowed to shine at my expense, and now that I'd finally stepped out of the shadows, they didn't know what to do with me. But the biggest surprise came from Mason. He posted in the family group chat for the first time in days. A short message. No fanfare, no flair. Honestly, the competition was rigged from the start, and Evan still won. Let's not pretend otherwise. The chat went dead for a second. Then Jordan struck like a missile, dropping an edited image of me holding the family trophy, while Camille dramatically fades into a puff of smoke. The cousins went wild. Aunts and uncles responded with thumbs-up emojis. Camille. She rage quit the group chat. No message, no explanation. Just gone. No one rushed to add her back. Later that week at a family BBQ, Jordan presented me with a framed certificate. Family champion, winner against all odds. He handed it to me with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for lifetime achievement awards. The younger cousins howled with laughter. Dad stared at the grill like it was whispering instructions for escape. Mom's smile twitched like she'd been slapped with a fish. I bowed. I'd like to thank my doubters. You made this victory so much sweeter. Jordan wiped a fake tear. An inspiration to struggling freelancers everywhere. Camille's husband, who had kept out of it until now, pulled me aside quietly. I'll be honest, I thought you were just being difficult. But now, I get it. That whole weekend was messed up. I nodded. It always was. This time people just noticed. Then something shifted with Mason. He and I started talking more. Nothing deep at first. Just casual jokes. Shared jabs about Mom's obsession with perfection, how Camille used to rewrite group texts before sending them. But then, during one long conversation, he admitted something I never expected. I always envied how you didn't care what they thought. I felt trapped. You got to escape. That stuck with me. Maybe we were all performing roles. Camille, the perfect prodigy. Mason, the polished prince. Me, the punchline. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one tired of the act. Life after the family Olympics wasn't exactly peaceful, but it was finally mine. There was something liberating about walking through the ruins of someone else's expectations and realizing they no longer applied. Mom and Dad stopped reaching out as often. Their texts grew shorter, more formal, like they were talking to a coworker instead of their son, which was fine by me. For once, I wasn't orbiting around their approval. I'd become my own son. A few weeks later, I got an invite to another family event, this time, a cousin's baby shower. I wasn't sure if I should go. Part of me expected Camille to show up armed with passive-aggressive comments and a smile that could slice steel. But Jordan called and said, "You have to come. I already got you a sash that says reigning champ." How could I say no? When I arrived, people looked at me differently. Not with sympathy or skepticism, but curiosity. Aunts who used to ignore me now asked about my work. Uncles who only spoke in sports analogies nodded like I'd finally made it onto some invisible team. Camille didn't show, of course, but her absence felt more like a void than a protest. Her power had always come from presence, how she dominated a room the way others orbited her. Without that gravity, people started drifting. Then something unexpected happened. Dad pulled me aside. His face looked a little less sharp than usual, like the edges had dulled. "Your mother's been worried," he said. "Camille hasn't answered her calls in a week." I waited, expecting some segue into blame, how it was my fault, how I'd pushed too far. But instead, he sighed. "We may have handled things poorly. It wasn't an apology. Not even close. But it cracked the surface." I nodded. "Yeah, you did." He didn't argue. That night, I got a message from Mason. "Drinks sometime." We hadn't hung out one-on-one since high school, and even then it was mostly him lecturing me about ambition while I doodled in my sketchbook. But this time, it was different. We met at a quiet bar downtown. No suits, no performance, just two guys finally out of costume. "I left the hospital." he said halfway through his drink. I blinked. Wait, what? He nodded. Burned out. Tired of pretending it was what I wanted. I've been setting up a private practice, smaller, flexible, my pace. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Then I realized I didn't have to say anything. He'd already done the hard part, breaking free from the narrative. He leaned back. You know, all those years I thought you were the lost one. Turns out you were just ahead of schedule. That stuck with me. It wasn't just a compliment. It was a shift in how we saw each other. He didn't say it with resentment or pity, just truth. Meanwhile, Camille was in full damage control mode online. She pivoted hard into her Family Unity rebrand posting, staged photos from childhood writing captions like, "We've always had each other's backs," with a carefully cropped image that just happened to cut me out. It was subtle, desperate, and obvious. One cousin sent it in the group chat with the caption, "Guess Evan took the picture." The chat lost it. Still, Camille wasn't done. She tried to organize a new retreat, exclusive invite list, carefully curated activities. Except this time, no one cared. Half the family ignored the message. A few RSVP'd, no just to be petty. Jordan replied, "Only if Evan gets to bring the trophy." Silence followed. Then came the most surreal moment of all Mom called me. Not to guilt trip, not to manipulate. She just called. Her voice was shaky, like she wasn't sure how to speak to me without the usual condescension. "I owe you an apology," she said. I stood in my living room stunned. For the trophy, for the competition, for all of it. I didn't jump in with a sarcastic remark. I just listened. She continued. Built this idea of who was successful based on what we understood. Doctors, lawyers, titles. It never occurred to us that success could look different, that it could be you. Her words hung in the air like fog. I didn't know if she meant every word, but for the first time she was trying. I could work with that. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed and realized something no scoreboard could measure. This was bigger than winning. I hadn't just changed how they saw me. I'd changed how I saw myself. A few days later, Mason invited me to his new office. It was still under renovation, exposed brick, half-assembled furniture, sunlight pouring in through wide windows. "I want it to feel like a place people can breathe," he said. "Not just patients." "Me too." I nodded, impressed. "Looks like the real thing." He smiled. "You helped me get here more than you know." That night, Jordan texted me a picture me at the BBQ holding the framed certificate. He added, "Still the champ." I laughed and replied, "Long live the underdog." The next day, he dropped off a custom t-shirt that said Evan breaking narrative since 1996. Things with the extended family shifted permanently. Camille's voice wasn't the loudest anymore. People remembered the silence after her walkout. They remembered the trophy. And more than anything, they remembered how hard my parents worked to pretend I didn't matter until I forced them to. Grandma, the quiet observer all these years, pulled me aside at a small family dinner. "You know why you hit them so hard?" she asked. I shook my head. "Because you never raised your voice. You just made too much sense to ignore." Then she leaned in and whispered, "They thought they could silence you by underestimating you, but you spoke louder with every win." She patted my hand, stood, and walked off like she hadn't just dropped the most gangster quote in family history. I sat there for a moment, stunned. Then I opened my phone, texted Jordan, and said, "Grandma just dropped bars." He replied, "Put it on a shirt." Camille's husband messaged me that night. She's still upset. Still says the whole thing was a setup against her. I replied, "What?" That's what I said before the weekend started. No one cared then. He left me on red. Appropriate. Mason and I got coffee again a week later. We didn't talk about family, just work-life hobbies. He even asked me to design the logo for his new practice. "You're the best one I know," he said casually. I paused. "You know other designers," he grinned. "Doesn't matter. You're still the best." As for my work, it took off. My story spread in ways I didn't expect. A few clients mentioned it. We heard about what happened. Loved how you handled it. Turns out, authenticity is good for business. Months passed. Camille stayed quiet. She started avoiding family events. When she did show up, she was guarded, polite, distant. It wasn't shame. It was fear. Fear of losing control again. Of being challenged. Of being seen. And that was the biggest shift of all. They saw me now. All of them. Not as the weird one. Not as the hobbyist. Not as the joke. As a threat. As an equal. As a story they couldn't rewrite. 1 year later, the house where it all started looked the same. Same stone pathway leading to the porch. Same hedges trimmed with surgical precision. Same wind chime on the front awning that never quite stopped jingling. But everything else that had changed. I stepped out of the car with a strange confidence. The kind you don't learn, the kind that only comes after you've stared down a room full of people who underestimated you, and smiled anyway. The family was gathering again this time for Thanksgiving, and for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't dreading it. There was no scoreboard this time, no pre-engraved trophies, just a table full of food, a few overcooked dishes, and people who now treated me like I belonged. As I walked through the front door, Jordan greeted me with a mock bow. The reigning champ has returned. I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help the smirk. Retired, actually, going out on top. He grinned. We'll see. The house buzzed with energy. Mason stood near the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, helping Dad carve the turkey. A year ago, that would have felt like a photo op for family bragging rights. Now it just looked like brothers sharing a task. He caught my eye, nodded, and I nodded back. Quiet understanding. We were good. Mom saw me next. She didn't rush over like she used to when Camille walked in, didn't make a grand announcement. She just smiled, soft and honest, and said, "Glad you're here, Evan." I nodded. Me too. That was all we needed. Then there was Camille. She arrived late. She always had a flair for timing, but this time it felt different. Calculated, maybe, or hesitant. She walked in wearing her usual perfection-pressed blouse, flawless hair, smile, just shy of genuine. She looked around the room like she was entering enemy territory, even though no one had declared a war. Our eyes met. She nodded, I nodded back. No words, no sparks, just silence sitting between us like an old bruise that hadn't fully healed. Dinner was mostly peaceful. Jokes, stories, clinking silverware. For the first time in years, there was no invisible hierarchy at the table. No one angled for attention. No one had to. Mason talked about his new practice. I shared a few stories about some recent design clients. Nothing grand, just real. Camille said little, mostly replying in short, pleasant bursts. Then Aunt Laura, unfiltered as ever, raised her glass. "Here's to last year's Family Olympics. Best disaster I've ever witnessed." Everyone laughed except Mom, who gave her a tight-lipped smile, and Camille, who shifted in her chair. Jordan couldn't resist. Remember the support goose pitch laughter erupted. Even Dad chuckled. Camille didn't. Her fingers tapped quietly on the side of her glass. I expected a comeback, some icy one-liner to reclaim control of the room. But instead, Camille surprised me. "You know," she said, voice calm, "I hated that weekend. But not for the reason you all think." The table fell quiet. I hated it because for the first time I couldn't control how people saw me. I've always needed that control. The perfect grades, the law school accolades, even my marriage felt like part of the image. "But Evan," she paused, glancing at me, "you didn't play by the rules. You didn't try to be someone. You just were, and people loved you for it." I stared, unsure if this was a trap, a guilt trip, or a long overdue moment of self-awareness. She continued. "I spent months trying to spin it, online in my head, even with Mark. But the truth, you deserved to win, and that terrified me." No one spoke. Even Jordan looked stunned. Then I said, You know what terrified me? Realizing that all I ever wanted wasn't your approval. It was to stop needing it. Camille blinked, looked down, and let out a breath that sounded like surrender. Later, after dessert and forced attempts at small talk, I found myself alone on the porch. The air was cold, crisp. Mason joined me, handed me a beer. So, that was something. I nodded. Yeah, didn't expect it. He leaned against the railing. You know when she said you just were. She was right. That's why it worked. You didn't try to impress anyone. You just showed up. I took a sip. Took me 20 years to figure out that was enough. Then he said something I'll never forget. You didn't just win a competition, Evan. You changed the game. That stuck with me. A few weeks later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was the original Family Olympics trophy, the one with Camille and Mason's names engraved, and a sticky note attached. This belongs to the right winner now. No signature. But I didn't need one. I placed it on my bookshelf, not as a prize, but as a reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet, steady, earned. It's the look on people's faces when they realize you were never the problem. You were just inconvenient to the story they were trying to tell. Since then, life hasn't been perfect. Mom still tries to control the narrative sometimes. Camille still posts her curated snapshots of faux unity. But they don't sting like they used to, because I stopped looking for proof of my worth in places that never wanted to see it. My business grew. Word of mouth spread. Clients came in not just for my designs, but because they knew I didn't bullshit. I told stories that mattered. Ones that started from rejection, from being underestimated, from sitting in the back of the room and quietly taking notes until it was my time to speak. Mason and I grew closer. We talk like actual brothers now. He invites me over, asks for advice, even sends clients my way. We joke about the old days, but the bitterness is gone. And Camille, she's still figuring it out. I see glimpses of change, not big ones. But maybe that's how growth happens, in tiny fractures, one truth at a time. As for the rest of the family, they remember. Not because I keep reminding them, but because people don't forget when someone rewrites a role they were never meant to outgrow. And me, I'm just living, not proving, not performing, just existing, loudly, unapologetically, and finally, freely. Story 2. I'm 29 years old and my name is Olivia. If I've learned anything in my life, it's how to blend in with the background, particularly when those who are meant to love you the most ignore you. I was raised in a well-furnished house in West Haven, a place where outward appearances are more important than the reality. The house was run like a showroom by my mother, Linda. Everything, including her kids, had to be immaculate, carefully chosen, and under control. Frank, my father, was quieter, but just as demanding. Reputation, outcomes, and creating the ideal family were important to him. But there was only one label for excellence in their eyes: Madison. My younger sister was named Madison. I'm 2 years behind, and she was their star as soon as she could walk. She has a cute chuckle. Even her outbursts were endearing, and her multitudes were lively. I was either too emotional, too gloomy, or just too much when I did the same things. The worst were birthdays. I vividly recall my 15th birthday, when I saw Madison blow out the candles on a cake with my name printed on it. I didn't care, I told myself. I grew accustomed to the shadows and background. I made an effort to win them affection by being self-reliant, responsible, and a stellar student. I turned into the underdog. Nobody took attention. I occasionally questioned if I had imagined it all. I could have overreacted. But I knew in my heart. Mom stayed up all night to help Madison after she failed a math test. She told me not to brag in front of your sister when I brought home a scholarship letter. I stopped displaying anything after that. In retrospect, I believe I developed an addiction to the quiet. It was less risky than expecting a response and receiving a negative one. I had given up on expecting fairness by the time I was 17. I no longer hoped that my parents would inquire about my day or wait for birthday cards. I had discovered that just one girl was important in our household, and I wasn't the one. With her flawless smile and well-maintained lifestyle, Madison had become our parents' most cherished asset. My parents didn't seem to realize that she was gregarious, charming, and skillfully manipulating. Like a queen defending her heir, Linda would stand up for her, no matter what, laughing, failing, or having tantrums. However, I ended up being the family's silent employee. I put all of my effort into my schoolwork and obligations I hadn't been asked to take on. I made sure not to get in the way when company arrived cleaned, when Mom was exhausted, and prepared meals when she was busy. I was skilled at disappearing mentally, physically, and emotionally, and I was good at it. I did not even receive a family meal upon graduating with honors from high school. However, Linda spread the word about Madison's internet photo of herself standing close to a superstar at a performance, boasting as though Madison had won an Olympic gold medal. I didn't despise my sister. Not then, anyhow. I simply gave up trying to figure out why I wasn't worthy of the same affection. "You're stronger than your sister," my father Frank used to say to me. "She requires further assistance." I recall blinking at him, unable to speak, as though abandoning was excused by power. I eventually packed my things, quietly, moved into a little dorm, without anyone to say goodbye to, and departed for college on a half-scholarship. Madison sobbed even then. "I was being theatrical," she remarked. "I was attempting to attract attention," she said. Linda concurred. Frank remained silent. I felt at last somewhat at ease at college. I concentrated on my future and created true pals. Structured due dates and tasks with rewards were all things that I found comforting. Even though I couldn't use it at home, I was able to discover my voice and words by studying literature and editing. But the family relationships remained the same, even when viewed from a great distance. I was still the unseen daughter, and Madison was still the golden one. Out of duty, I continued to phone home, and she was always the subject of the talk. Her most recent party, her new lover. She got a new haircut. I nodded, listened, and grinned into the quiet. Although I had long accepted my job, something had begun to change in my heart. A little glimmer of consciousness. I didn't have to continue living this way. I wasn't required to continue narrating a narrative. I never consented to participate. A little more than 2 weeks before Madison's wedding, it was a Thursday afternoon. At work, I had just completed a rigorous manuscript review. I recall sitting in my car, parked at a red light downtown, feeling the weight of the folder on my lap. It was a drab gray sky, the sort that slows down everything. Although I was tired, I felt content. I had recently been shortlisted for a senior editing position at the publishing firm. It was something, but it wasn't definitive, something that wasn't praised. Then suddenly, with a loud smash and metal wrenching against metal, my whole world fell apart. Raindrops of glass flying. I was too busy to even shout. I was jerked sideways after being smashed into the steering wheel. My vision became hazy. The world turned dark, and everything whirled. I was lying in a hospital bed when I opened my eyes. My arms had tubes going from them. The quiet was broken by the gentle beep of a monitor. My legs felt like they were buried in bricks, and my head ached. I attempted to move, but panic crept up my throat. A quiet voice whispered next to me at that moment. "Don't try to set up just yet, please." I gently turned my head. A nurse's name tag stated, "This young child died." Ava gave a little smile. "You're secure. You were involved in a collision. After a day of unconsciousness, you are presently stabilized." The words came to me slowly. I tried to inquire about what had transpired, but my lips was parched and my body ached. She explained me kindly. A slight concussion, many damaged ribs, and 2 broken legs. Tests were still being conducted. Then came the words that stuck in my mind. The driver who struck you ran away. A collision and escape. I felt a chill go through me. At a red light, I was halted. I wasn't driving too fast. I wasn't reckless. I was left in my car after someone crashed into it. Broken. Unconscious. Powerless. I found out the specifics in the days that followed. The driver's side of my car had been smashed in the crash. Although they had retrieved some debris from the area, the police had not yet located the car. It seemed like weight and needles were used to glue my body together. I was in such much pain that I couldn't even turn my head. Once more, I was confined to that hospital bed and left in quiet. It wasn't emotional this time, though. It was tangible. I was unable to walk. I was unable to rise. I was unable to go. And my family has yet to arrive. They didn't know yet, I reminded myself. I reasoned that Ma must be assisting Madison, who must be preoccupied with wedding preparations. Frank would come after work, I promised myself. The quiet was too loud, so I told myself stories. However, I was aware of the reality. I knew it all along. They didn't prioritize me. Not right now. I didn't see either of my parents for 5 days. With a pillow behind my back and an IV steadily leaking into my arm, I was sitting up straight in bed. When the door opened, Ava had just finished helping me freshen up and brush my hair. My mother's strong, flowery perfume was the first thing I smelled. Then, with my father, as rigid and calm as ever, her pointed heels clicked on the tile behind her. Linda had on an expensive jacket, a pearl necklace, and a phony, sympathetic expression. Frank was wearing an immaculately straight blue suit tie. They did not appear to be seeing their injured daughter. Instead, they appeared to be attending a conference. I'm still reading. Linda looked at the open book in my lap and spoke in a clear, critical tone. It's a job. Quietly, I answered. Texts. Naturally, she mumbled. Always in operation. She approached, sat down as if she didn't want to touch anything after casting a disdainful glance around the room. Frank didn't say hi at all. He was direct in his approach. You will be released in a few weeks according to the physicians. Yes, I nodded, but I'll require rehabilitation and a wheelchair. The agony is still there. Trying not to panic, I let out a breath. Still awful. Well, he said, 3 weeks from now is Madison's wedding. You'll arrive on schedule. I blinked. You're kidding. I'm not well enough to go to a wedding. Linda spoke a little louder. Your sister has a big day today. Olivia, you must be present. The bride is her. Everyone will be watching her. I spoke in a forceful yet composed tone. I will continue to need a wheelchair. I can hardly sit pain-free for 20 minutes. I need to relax, the doctor stated. Excuses. Frank interrupted. I worked the day after I tore my ACL when I was your age. You've always evaded accountability by using suffering. I stared at them with disbelief. Instead of asking how I was doing, were they actually there to guilt-trip me into going to a wedding? My throat burned, and my chest constricted. I was struck by a car and left comatose in the street. Yet you don't even seem to care. Linda said, You're being dramatic. You are the center of attention, aren't you? I've spent days here. My voice wavered as I spoke. You were where? Why did you not come? Why didn't you? She barked. Because we were organizing your sister's wedding. You shouldn't be adding to her already high level of stress. I felt something shatter inside. I nearly died. Linda got to her feet. Face your red eyes. It's wild enough. Then, in a single terrifying move, it occurred. She took the hard plastic blood pressure monitor off the side table, still with its cables connected, and threw it at me, hitting the side of my head. A searing ache ripped through my head. With blood already dripping from my temple, I let out a cry. The machine thudded heavily on the floor. A second later, Ava raced through the door, followed by a security guard who had been down the corridor. What's going on here? She struck me. Dazed, I muttered. Take a step back now. Linda was told by the guard. Frank walked over to the door. There is a miscommunication here. Sir, don't move. The guard issued a warning. 2 additional hospital employees hurried in amid the confusion when Ava hit the emergency call button. Linda opened her mouth to speak. Suddenly, her voice became quiet. "I didn't intend to. A patient was attacked by you. The guard lost his temper. The cops are now involved." In 10 minutes, 2 police in uniform showed up. Frank and Linda were taken into custody. In front of me, shackled in my hospital room. They didn't clash. Frank appeared in disbelief. Linda made an effort to weep. I didn't care if it was real or not. After they were led away, I was left trembling, and for the first time in my life pressing a cool cloth to my bleeding head. I wasn't just disregarded. I was wounded. Finally, someone noticed it. Following the incident, I spent the night in the hospital for observation. To ensure there was no significant inside damage, the physicians performed a CT scan. From my head to the blow. Ava lingered late to sit next to me well past her shift. She continued to murmur and push her eyes on the side of my face. "That wasn't fair to you. Not a bit." I refrained from crying. I refrained from screaming. The antiseptic white ceiling caught my attention as I lay there, silently wondering how far someone must fall before their family realizes the marks they leave behind. Around 9 in the morning, Ava came back with some orange juice apples and porridge for breakfast. "You have a guest in the hallway," she added softly. "My name is Jason," he said. Jason was frozen by me. It had been nearly 2 years since I last saw him. We had attended the same school, lived in the same area, and had exchanged books, heartbreaks, and laughs. The only person in my life who had ever really seen me was him. Our bond weakened as college drew us in various directions. However, I had never forgotten how secure he made me feel. I requested that he wait. Ava went on. "I wasn't certain you were game." "No," I answered softly. "Bring him in." After a minute, the door opened, and he appeared taller than I had recalled, wearing trousers and a gray sweatshirt. His eyes still had the same warmth I recalled from years ago, even if his dark hair was messier than usual. "Hey," he whispered quietly as he entered. I gave an uneasy smile. "Hello." After taking a quick look around, he drew the chair closer. "You appear to have experienced a battle. I also had the urge." A protracted hush ensued. I eventually let out a breath and turned to face him. "Really? Jason?" "I need your assistance." He didn't flinch. "Declare the word. I'm interested in attending Madison's wedding." I realize it sounds crazy. I'm shattered, battered, and hardly able to move. However, I must be present. Not for her. For me. I must speak the truth. They never let me express what I have to say. Jason bent over. "Are you certain?" Slowly, I nodded. "I've had enough of silence. I need your assistance to get there. Whatever it takes, wheelchair painkillers." He gave me a close look. Behind his eyes, something was flashing. "I was going to come see you anyway," he added. "I also have something to tell you." I cocked my head a bit. "What is it?" He paused for a moment. "It concerns your mishap. I believe you should hear about something you are unaware of." "Not yet, though. Let's start by strengthening you so you can confront them and tell the truth." I gasped. He was providing more than simply assistance. There was more to it. Something more profound. Additionally, I was aware that I wouldn't be attending that wedding by myself. The wedding day came sooner than I had anticipated. The night before, I hadn't slept well. My mind is racing with too many ideas. The stillness is crowded with too many memories. I had been given the all-clear to leave the hospital. In a single circumstance. Restricted mobility, medication-assisted pain management, and complete assistance. Without hesitation, I agreed. Everything had already been handled by Jason. He gave me a dress that fit over my casts, and was basic yet lovely in navy blue. Blessed be Ava, she helped me get ready by fixing my hair and putting on a little lipstick to hide the bruises close to my hairline. "Are you certain about this?" As she was putting on my jewelry, she inquired. I said I've never been more certain of anything. With calm hands, Jason wheeled me out of the hospital. On the drive there, we didn't talk much. He frequently looked at me in the rearview mirror. Silent certainty flooded his gaze. I held the little note card tightly in my hand. I wasn't sure if I would follow it, but it was the one with my speech. The wedding took place at a large hotel in West Haven's downtown, complete with polished marble floors, chandeliers, and white flowers. Arriving guests were wearing elegant tuxedos and flowing dresses, grinning for pictures, as though everything was ideal. The bride's parents were already incarcerated, but nobody present knew it. Jason parked close to the side door. "They have a ramp set up," he added, "but I've got you, if there's a problem." He assisted me getting into the wheelchair and led me down the inside side hallway. Perfume, laughing, and courteous murmurs filled the air. As we walked in, heads turned. I was recognized by a few of the guests. Others only gazed. A man with a determined step on either side of a woman in a wheelchair who was obviously wounded. I sensed the beginning of the murmuring. "She is the sister of Madison. How did she end up? Shouldn't she be recuperating?" The wedding was just minutes away from starting as we walked into the grand ballroom. The room was lined with rows of white seats. The groom, Eric, stood rigidly in an archway that was lined with flower petals. Despite his good looks, he was preoccupied. Jason whispered to me, "Olivia, you're stronger than all of them." I gave one mute nod. I noticed Madison at that point. In her white clothing, she shone brightly. Her makeup was perfect, every hair in its proper position. For a brief moment, she saw me right away. Her smile wavered. She turned aside, though, and carried on posing for pictures. She didn't find my presence surprising. As the ceremony started, she was irritated. I sensed a change in the tension in the room. Jason nudged me forward to a position close to the front row. The mother of the groom, Susan, was sitting next to us. She gave me a little nod after giving me a serious look. I was unable to determine if it was respect, curiosity, or pity. All three, perhaps. Everyone was welcomed by the officiant. The music started. Madison gripped Frank's cousin's arm rather than our father's as he walked down the aisle. Nobody gave an explanation for her true parents' absence. As vows were made, the falsehood lingered in the air like perfume, sweet, potent, and oppressive. I folded my hands in my lap and sat quietly. My purpose was not to interrupt the wedding. I was here to get over my act. Applause marked the end of the event, flashes of the camera and fake laughs. Every stretch felt like a lifetime as I remained still in my chair. With one hand softly resting on the wheelchair handles, Jason stood behind me. Since we had walked in, he had been silent, just remained around like a silent barrier. The guests started to make their way to the reception hall that was adjacent. The flutes of champagne clinked. Soft jazz was played by the band. Waiters carried platters of bubbly drinks between chats. Everyone was making a concerted effort to act as though the bride's parents hadn't been present on the most important day of her life. It was time I knew. Slowly, we made our way inside the reception area. I was still able to view the stage when Jason moved my chair to a discreet corner table. Every table had a flower centerpiece, towering candles, and exquisite gold draperies. As Madison and Eric greeted visitors, a photographer hovered close by to take shots. Madison glanced in my direction many times. She never grinned. Then, using a cordless microphone, the master of ceremonies took over. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, here are some family members who will be extending their congrats to the newlyweds. Let's start by listening to Olivia, the bride's sister." A beat skipped in my chest. No one had informed me that I would be speaking. Jason gave my shoulder a little squeeze. "You're capable." I nodded after taking a long breath. He stopped just in front of the stage and wheeled me forward. I was given the microphone by the MC, who leaned down to do so. Everyone looked around. For a minute, I swallowed deeply. Only my heartbeat was audible. Then I lifted the microphone and spoke, my voice solid, yet tremulous. "Good night," I said. I look around the throng. I might not be familiar to all of you. I'm Madison's elder sister, Olivia, and I wasn't present for the picture session today. I arrived to tell the truth. There was silence in the room. 2 weeks ago, I wasn't meant to be here. I got into an automobile accident. Someone who never paused to see whether I was still alive struck me when I was stopped at a red light. I was admitted to the hospital. My legs are both fractured, a concussion and cracked ribs. The room erupted in whispers. However, my parents didn't come to check on me when they finally paid me a visit in the hospital. They arrived to inform me that I was required to attend this wedding, regardless of the state I was in. My mother became upset with me when I refused. She tossed a medical equipment at my head after picking it up. The audience resonated with gasps. I had blood on my hands. I let out a yell. Security and the nurse entered at that point. They aren't here today for that reason, because what they did to me led to their arrest. The audience froze. The music had ceased as well. I've been silent all my life. I've been courteous. I haven't been seen. On the other hand, my sister was the best child. It was me who was instructed to quit whining and to be strong. In order for her to shine greater, I was instructed to shrink myself. I turned to face Madison. She had a light complexion. Her hands gripped the table's edge. But I'm not getting any smaller today, since I've come to the conclusion that quiet benefits no one. I'm not hiding today. After a moment, I lowered my voice to Madison. I hope you find the happiness I never had in this marriage. However, I will no longer defend those who harm me, only because they are related to me. The applause began softly, and then became louder as I returned the microphone. Everyone stood. Others dabbed at their eyes. I sat trembling as Jason moved forward and carefully wheeled me back to my seat. Not out of fear, but out of freedom. It was the first time they had listened to me, and the first time I had spoken. I was still recovering my breath when Jason said, "Are you okay?" in a soft voice. I nodded just a little. I had taken more than I had anticipated from my speech, emotionally, not physically. 7 minutes of quiet interrupted by a lifetime. The room was in startled silence for 7 minutes. Jason then moved ahead. Unsure of what he was doing, I watched him make his way to the front. "Be calm." He was still, but his eyes were burning. Despite his perplexed expression, the master of ceremonies gave him the microphone without asking. With a quiet firmness that reverberated to the ballroom's outermost walls. Jason cleared his throat and began. Although I had no intention of speaking today, there was something that must be heard and stated. Everybody looked at me, then at him, then back again. I've known Olivia since we were little, and my name is Jason. She invited me to accompany her today, but I'm also here for another reason. Something I can't keep to myself any longer. He hesitated a moment. Madison tensed. Eric gave her a perplexed expression. Jason went on. I collaborate with a private legal investigator. I was working late downtown 2 weeks ago when I was leaving the workplace. There was a major vehicle collision that I saw. A car hit a stopped vehicle after running a red light at full speed. The motorist did not halt. They ran away. Now the murmurs came back louder. Yesterday I informed the authorities about the license plate number I had captured. I followed up. The car was found at an out-of-town garage. After a front-end accident, it was being repaired. He turned to face Madison squarely. You are the car's registered owner. Madison's expression became pale. The headlines were already out, and her palm shook as she sought for Eric's arm. At her own wedding, the bride was detained, and underneath the gleaming exterior, the city was alive with rumors of the broken family. I was unconcerned with the rumors. I desired the truth, realized where it was most important, before the law under oath. Linda. The room fell into a thick quiet. The victim of that hit and run was Olivia. According to Jason, her own sister was the one who left her unconscious, bleeding and broken in her car. Madison's voice rose in dread as she abruptly got up. It wasn't deliberate. I was unaware of her presence. I was simply in a panic. As if she were radioactive, Eric moved away from her. You let your sister to perish after hitting her. I didn't intend to. I promise. He gave a head shake. You didn't even tell me. Jason wasn't finished yet, as well as Olivia's parents. They were aware. They contributed to its concealment, kept it a secret while taking the vehicle to a private repair facility. They are incarcerated for that reason, for obstructing justice as well as violence. The visitors let out a collective gasp. Many got up from their chairs. Clearly startled, Eric's mother, Susan, placed her hands to her face. Now the place was in disarray. They took out their phones. Outrage replaced the whispers. Then the last blow was delivered. Silently, 2 officers in uniform moved forward from their position at the rear. One of them, Madison Walker, stated, "You are being arrested for felony hit and run, careless hazard, and neglecting to disclose a crime." The room went cold. Madison made an effort to say anything at all. However, the cops had already read her rights and grabbed her by the arms. With his wedding band dangling loosely on his finger, Eric stood there in disbelief. As they escorted Madison out of the ballroom, he carefully and silently removed it and set it on the table. I just sat there, breathing, not grinning, or feeling victorious. In my life, for the first time. It wasn't only me who knew the truth. Everyone in that room owned it. Tension and the scent of ancient wood filled the courtroom. Even though the wedding was weeks ago, the pain of betrayal had not lessened. I sat next to Jason in my wheelchair. When the bailiff called the court to order, we both fell silent. The headlines were out there already. At her own wedding, the bride was detained. And underneath the gleaming exterior, the city was alive with rumors of the broken family. I was unconcerned with the rumors. I desired the truth, realized where it was most important, before the law under oath. Frank and Linda sat at the defense table, both of them pallid and exhausted. For once. The horror in Linda's eyes was visible through her cosmetics. Frank refused to give me a glance. Madison, who faces criminal charges, sat aside in a different hearing. We had all been connected, and this day would resolve their trial, which was taking place next door, really difficult to bury. Jason assisted me in filing charges for mental and physical trauma assault, hospital attack conspiracy, to obstruct justice, and evidence tampering. I gave a calm, honest testimony without embellishing or dramatizing anything. I just recounted the tale, my narrative as it actually transpired. Judge Carter, a strict but just woman, listened carefully. The medical reports were delivered by Jason. My nurse Ava testified. They played hospital security footage. Jason also provided the phone logs and repair shop receipt, which demonstrated that Linda and Frank had purposefully hidden Madison's behavior. Jason's closing remarks stirred something within of me, not just optimism, but power. "This is not just a case of broken bones and bruises," he remarked. "It is about a family structure that rewarded one child with protection and punished the other with isolation. And it is about years of quiet. This court has the opportunity to recognize that no one is above the law, regardless of their lineage or title, and that quiet does not equate to peace." The judge inhaled, and the room stayed still. The verdicts followed. Linda Walker is convicted of both obstruction and assault. Frank Walker was found guilty of conspiring to hide a criminal offense. Then came sentencing. Both received 18-month sentences, without the chance of early release from state jail. Following discharge, a separate order was imposed requiring community service and rehabilitation. When the gavel struck, Linda started crying. Frank lowered his head without uttering a word. I refrained from crying. I didn't recoil. I just watched while they were removed. Resolution rather than retaliation. We were outside the courthouse 1 hour later. I felt the warmth of the sun on my flesh. Jason was standing next to me, his countenance soft, his tie relaxed. He extracted a little velvet box from his jacket pocket. My breath caught. He murmured quietly, referring to Olivia. "I've seen you fight fights that no one should have to fight alone. You are the most courageous person I have ever encountered. Furthermore, I don't want to merely be your witness or buddy. I would want to be your house." He opened the package. There was a plain yet tasteful ring within, subtle yet profoundly meaningful. "Are you going to wed me?" my eyes filled with tears. Release, the type of tears that come when you realize you're finally being noticed, but not because you're in agony. Safe at last. Yes, I muttered. I crossed the park without a cane a year later. Soft pink petals fell all around me like a silent celebration as the breeze carried the aroma of cherry blossoms. Jason waited under a tree on a seat. His hand was softly resting on his knee, and he was grinning as he noticed me. He stood as I walked up to him and remarked, "I still can't believe you're walking like that." I grinned. My physical therapist can't either. Together, we watched the families go by and the children giggling by the fountain. On chilly days, my legs still hurt, but I was no longer in need of medications. My heart and body were beginning to heal from the wounds. A lot had changed. I took a few months off after the trial to concentrate entirely on getting better. When spring finally arrived, Jason and I realized that our temporary arrangement was no longer an option. In a low-key ceremony by the lake, we were married. No contrived pictures, no matching gowns, only those that cared about us, and a little peace circle. I went back to work as an associate editor at the publishing firm. To my astonishment, the team greeted me with respect rather than sympathy once my supervisor took over my job. The book, however, was the most significant difference. Invisible. Not anymore. An authentic tale of bravery, survival, and quiet. I owned it. Authored, revised, and released under my name. It turned into a silent bestseller. I received messages, emails, and even thank you stops at cafes. That was also my story. Madison, too. She received a 3-year jail term. After serving less than 2 years, she was freed on severe parole and required to attend therapy as required by the court. Since then, we haven't talked. I used to be haunted by her quiet. It releases me now. Following their release, Linda and Frank made an effort to get in touch. Voicemails and letters. Sorry, I read either one or two. They apologized, saying they didn't realize what they were doing. However, I had discovered something significant. To forgive is not to forget. It's deciding for yourself to have serenity, whether the other person is sympathetic to your plight. Therefore, no, I didn't return. What was never entire was not rebuilt by me. Jason accompanied me as I proceeded, as a lady who pieced her life back together rather than as a survivor. On the bench, Jason turned to face me. Did they not reach out again? I gave a nod. Are you all right? I'm really okay, I said. For a long time, we sat in quiet, allowing the moment to unfold, like a page that no longer needed to be written. I glanced at my ring. Its surface is swirling with sunlight, and I felt it fully and without question for the first time in my life. Liberty, not the type you rush at, the kind you gradually, painstakingly, but irrevocably construct. If you could sense my narrative, if it made even a small impression on you. After that, do take a time to subscribe to the channel, like, and comment. You have no idea how much your support means. I appreciate you hearing what I have to say.